Hi everybody, welcome back to channel Stu Clark. First off, a huge shout out to everybody that subscribed to my channel. We just hit a nice milestone of 4,000 subscribers yesterday, so that's great. We're just kind of keep growing this channel. I have wildlife photography and camera talk. If you're interested in that sort of thing, please consider liking and subscribing. Really helped me out and helped me grow this channel. I really appreciate that. So in today's video, we're going to take a look at the Nikon Z8, my go-to camera, and in my opinion, I think it's one of the best wildlife cameras on the market in 2025. I know Petapixel just did a podcast the other day and they're talking about, what's the best wildlife camera. And it's interesting when you have three guys that don't shoot wildlife photography talking about wildlife cameras. It's interesting because I think with the Nikon Z8, there's a lot of behind the scenes when it comes to setting it up correctly that really set it apart from some of the other brands. And it's one thing if you're watching any YouTube reviews on Nikon cameras, the one thing that you often see come up, how difficult it is to navigate the menus. And I don't disagree with that. There's a bunch of different menus. So photo shooting menu A, B, C, and D. Video recording menu A, B, C, and D. Custom settings menu A, B, C, and D. The playback menu. The setup menu. The network menu. And my menu, which you can customize. And they all intertwine and they all will have bits and pieces of what you're looking for. And I think so when you have someone that comes from, that's a Sony shooter or a Canon shooter, and they've been given a Nikon camera to test out, they're used to using the menus as part of their daily shooting habits. You need to go into the menus and change some things. The Nikon system, especially the Z8 and the Z9, they have what they call shooting banks. And these shooting banks, once you have them dialed in, and it's not an easy prospect by any means, it will take, it's something that they evolve over time. But once you get them set up, the camera can be used in a professional manner throughout the day where you actually do not need to go into menus. You will not need to dive into the menus. So I think a lot of times I say when people talk about how difficult it is to find something in the menus, it's that they haven't set the camera up properly. They're not utilizing the shooting banks properly. And so that's what I want to have a bit of a discussion about. It's not going to be a full setup. However, I will be providing a link. I've got my shooting bank A settings posted on my website right now. You can go and download them for free. I would really appreciate though if you use them and they help you out. If you want to throw me a tip on the Superfan on YouTube, that'd be fantastic. I've also have a link in my in the description too if you want to use PayPal instead. But that would really help me out and really help to keep me providing you some of these insightful tips, especially for kind of getting the most out of your Nikon camera. So with Nikon, they've got shooting banks. They've got A, B, C, and D. So they've got 4 shooting banks for both photo and video. And the idea behind these shooting banks is that you can set it up so if you're a wildlife photographer, wedding photographer, landscape photographer, you can have shooting bank A for wildlife, you can have shooting bank B for weddings, you can have shooting bank C for landscapes, and then you can have shooting bank D as for architecture, for example. Myself, I am a wildlife photographer. I do some real estate, some architectural photography, and a little bit of landscape photography. The core of my camera settings is about wildlife. With these shooting banks, if you've come from the Z6, if you come from any of the mid-tier Nikon cameras, they don't have shooting banks. They have user 1 and user 2. The user 1 and user 2 are quite a bit different than shooting banks. So user 1, user 2, you set up the camera, you set up user 1, you set up user 2, and you can set it up for wildlife and or landscape, for example. And then you go out, you shoot for the day, make a bunch of changes, turn the camera on and off. When you go back to U1 and U2, it's as you left it. So it's really nice and simple. When you start the day, your settings are as they were. Shooting banks are a little bit different for better or worse. And to get the most out of them, you really have to adopt them into your shooting style. The problem with shooting banks is you get them all set up perfect. You go out shooting, you change some settings. Whatever changes you make are now those settings. So in order to use shooting banks effectively, you need to switch between the shooting banks as your settings or your subject change, as opposed to switching the subject mode in shooting bank A and changing it from birds to mammals and kind of changing it on the fly. You really want to go from shooting bank A to shooting bank C, for example. So you got birds on one, wildlife on the other, and you actually change the shooting bank to change it up for your subject. And the reason you want to do this is that way, when you go to shooting bank A, it's set up for birds. Your C is set up for wildlife. Your shooting bank D is set up for landscape. And when you go to them, they're all ready to go, and you haven't made changes on the fly in the day that will then kind of confuse you the next time you go to those shooting banks. Like I said, I'm going to be having, I've got Shooting Bank A on my website right now. Shooting Bank B will hopefully be posted before this video is posted. And then C and D, I'm working on getting those together as well. So all those settings will be available on there. With shooting banks, these cameras are ridiculously customizable. You've got function 1 and function 2 on the front here. So you've got function 1 and function 2. You've got the 2 buttons on the front of the camera. You've got all the back buttons can be customized. So all the back buttons can be customized depending on what you're doing. There's some great YouTube channels talk about setting up cameras. And one of the problems is that, for me, is that even as a professional photographer, you're not shooting every week. It's going to be gaps between your shooting. You can get this camera absolutely dialed for every subject. You can customize this to the nth degree where it's gonna be absolutely perfect. The problem is, if you don't have some consistency between shooting bank A, B, C, and D, you're just going to be completely lost. And so there's certain functions, certain customizations that I want to have in the same place for A, B, C, and D, but also for photo and video. So that when I pick up the camera, subject changes, subject matter changes, bird flying in, birds perched, I'm not fumbling around. I know exactly what buttons I want to press, regardless of in photo, video, or other banks. So in order to use the shooting banks effectively, you have to kind of really adopt the shooting banks into your entire workflow. So the way I've got my shooting bank set up, A is for estuary, open areas for birds. Things like shorebirds, waterfowl, osprey, going to the beach, going to the estuary. We're going to be in an open environment where you're not dealing with a lot of just sticks, branches, trees. You're not dealing with kind of a closed-in area. It's definitely more for an open area shoot. My shooting bank B is my forest photography. I'm going into the woods looking for warblers, grouse, any sort of thing in a much tighter environment where you're going to be doing a lot more potential distractions in front or around the bird. So you're just going to be narrowing down a lot of the focus areas to kind of just eliminate any of those distractions. My shooting bank C is my wildlife specific. So that's going to be where elk, bears, things that you think of. Yellowstone is a good example. Generally wide open areas where you're going to be dealing with both foreground and background distractions. You're going to want to use, in a lot of cases, a narrow rectangular box to kind of help to isolate your subject. And then my shooting bank D is my landscape and my real estate photography settings. So these settings, the reason I've done it this way is that when I head out the door, I know where I'm going. I know what kind of subjects I'm going to be looking for. So it's really easy to go out the door. I'm heading to the estuary. I go to shooting bank A. And I know when I get there, my camera is set up accordingly for 80% of what I'm going to encounter on the day. Same thing, I'm going out looking for warblers. Everything gets set to shooting bank B. And I know that the camera is effectively set up for most of the subjects I'm going to encounter on the day. Same going out for landscape, going out to, doing a real estate shoot. Same thing, go to shooting bank D. Everything's ready to go. And the most important part about doing it this way is that if I'm in shooting bank A and a bear comes walking out onto the beach, I go and I start changing. I want to go into the menus and start to change my subject detect over to animal from birds. And you immediately end up, you've made changes to that shooting bank that if you don't, you then have to change it back to birds. And the idea with these banks is you want to keep them as consistent as possible. So you want to make the changes you're going to make during the day are going to be ISO, they're going to be shutter speed, and aperture. Those are the three things that you're generally going to change on the camera itself. You're not going to do any menu diving to make kind of core changes to the shooting bank. With shooting banks, in order to get the most out of them, first off, they've got to be accessible. So how I like to do that, so you've got the I button on the back. When you press the I button, it brings up the I menu. And the I menu is something that a lot of people will utilize a fair bit. The only thing from a photography standpoint I use the I menu for is see where it says shoot A and custom A. That's how I switch from my shooting menu bank A to my shooting bank B, C, or D, and the custom settings menu A, B, C, or D. So these are going to be from the photo side of it. They are really the only things I access the I menu for. With the video side, there are a few things that you will sometimes access it. And then also, I should say, from my wildlife photo menu, I never use anything on the I menu, but you will access things on the landscape, real estate side of things. My shooting bank D, I will access more things in the I menu. So we just press the I button. Then you can use the D-pad to switch between shooting banks and hit the OK button to engage for both shooting bank and the custom settings menu. And you can see how quickly you can move between all the banks really fast and really effectively, and can completely take control of the camera without having to dive deep into menus trying to make changes. And back to birds. A good example would be I'm out at the estuary photographing birds, and all of a sudden the sun's coming up over the mountains in the background. I want to take some landscape shots. It's that simple. My camera is now set up for landscape photography. And this is one of the things, you can just see how it's two changes. Instantly the camera is completely changed from a fast action wildlife camera to a landscape camera. So instead of making change, like I said, you don't want to make changes in that bank B. You don't want to all of a sudden try and change to manual ISO from auto ISO and do all these changes on your bank A. All you want to do is change to bank D. You just want to change the whole bank and change the whole camera over. You want to go right back to your wildlife, and I'm right back to shooting wildlife. I'm right back on the subjects I need, and the shooting's good, and we're good to go. And what's really important, I've got the shoot and the custom in the same spot on the I menu on all of my banks, both photo and video. It doesn't matter where I am, I can make those quick changes really simply. And this is, I think, in order for the shooting banks to work well, you really need, this is the best way I think you can adopt it. With shooting banks, these cameras are incredibly customizable. And I've seen some of the channels out there that I've gone through, and they've really taken their time to dial in each bank according to the subject they plan on shooting. The problem is, I think you can make it too confusing. And I've adopted a really simple approach. I've had a lot of comments. I think a lot of you out there appreciate that simple approach. Makes it easier to get the shot in the field. Yes, you can make them 5% better than what I have got them here by really just tweaking every little thing. The problem is, if you're not shooting every single day, even as a professional wildlife photographer, I'm not out every day. There's going to be, weeks and gaps. There's going to be weeks, sometimes months in between, depending on what's happening in life. My business, as much as I'm photography based, it's also a wholesale business that I run. A lot of times depending on the season, I'm not behind the camera all the time. So because of that, I found it extremely important to simplify the custom settings in conjunction with the banks, so that when you go to press a button, so for me, the cycle area AF is, I think, the most important custom setting on these cameras. It is fantastic. So what the cycle area AF is, I did a whole video on it last week. Cycle area AF allows you to change the shape and size of the autofocus area, and then also whether you have subject detect on or not. You can have it where you can go through 10 different things. It's too many, I think. I use 3. And 3 I find is that I go for, it allows me to get the most out of it without sitting there pressing the button trying to go through a bunch. Because a lot of times when I'm changing it is that for whatever reason the camera's not picking up the subject. I don't want to keep pressing a button trying to go through 10 different autofocus areas to get the one I want. The single point no subject is one that I use a lot, where where if you have the subject detect is just not picking up your subject, you want it to override it with the single point focus here. I don't want to be searching through a bunch of different focus points in order to find that. So how I like to use it with the cycle area AF is the function 2 button, which is the lower button on the front of the camera. And when I press that button, so you can see here, it goes from wide, so I've got it as a rectangle. I've got auto area, so that's where right now it goes right over the eye, and then I've got single point, which is it focuses where you put it. These 3 work amazingly well in an open environment. Auto area, you can see right on the eye of the bird, really nice and simple. No matter which bird I switch to, you'll see that it's quick to pick up the eye between each of them. So the auto area is my go-to in open environments. The problem is you start sowing branches and grasses or twigs or sticks in front of it, it can then start to pick up things in the foreground or the background. It works really well still, but it's not as good. So you might need some overrides here. And that's where the first one is going to be the wide area AF. So you can see this one here, it gives me a bit more control. So if we go to the swallow shots, where we've got grasses in the foreground here, this allows me to keep this box. So with the auto area, it might pull off the grass in the front. So this one's really nice because you can put that box just above the grasses in the zone where the swallows are flying, and that will then keep the focus point. It'll be looking for the subject in that area. So it really works really, really well. The latest firmware update, you can stretch that out. You can go long, you can go near, you can really customize that box, which is really awesome. Now with my shooting bank B, to give you an example. So a lot of times you're going to have a lot more potential for the autofocus to pull forward or backward. In this one here, a lot of these leaves have got little circles in them where the camera might be fooled into thinking that's an eye. So that would be a great example so by using this 5x3 box, this smaller autofocus box, I just narrow everything down. So my forest photography, instead of letting the camera have free reign over a larger area, I'm just trying to narrow down where it looks for the subject. So again, using the 3 on the cycle area AF, I use 3D instead of the auto area. So 3D, if you're not familiar with 3D, you basically put it over the subject, and then as you engage autofocus, it will then track the subject you've put it on. And it works super well. You will find sometimes it might get hung on a few things, and that's where we've got that single point again, where I can just put the single point right on the eye exactly where I want it, and I'm overriding any of the subject detect. And I found that having that on all of my banks is just super important. Now we go switch up to shooting bank C here. In shooting bank C, I'm going to be using auto area again. So we're going back to the full auto area AF, using single point, and then we're going to do a larger box. And the reason behind the larger box, by going up and down, a lot of cases where, elk or deer, for example, a lot of times they'll be grazing. So having the larger box, you can have it where you've got more head movement of the animal, and you'll still allow that subject detect to stay on your whether it's elk, bears, deer, things like that. That will just gives you a little bit more room to follow your subject, but at the same time, it will allow you can see the lower edge of the box there. It'll allow you to keep that off of distractions in the foreground. So this is a great one where this one where I was actually focusing on the fawns, and you'll notice how it wants to pick up the butt there. An auto area, same thing. It wants to pick up the female. I can go to single point right over top of the fawn and focus exactly where I want to. So that's one, if you've got multiple subject, that single point will allow you to just make sure you've got your focus point on the subject you're looking for. So that's why that cycle area is really nice. Or the bear here is a great example. Subject detect. Oh, it did find the eye there. So there you go. You see how even with cedars around it, it's still able to pick up the eye there. Same thing with auto area. But in this situation here, if you did find it was picking up, a lot of times it might pick up the nostril and the nose in the front just based on, the nose being rounded will often look like an eye to the camera, so it might front focus on it. The single point's really nice because you can put it right over the eye of your subject and just focus exactly where you want to, and that way you can override it and you're focusing exactly on the spot you expect. And that having that single point override is so nice. And now when we go to shooting bank D, which is going to be the landscape, so this one is I use a lot for people potentially. Myself, I'm going to be photographing myself in the environment, also for studio shooting. So this one I'm going to use a larger rectangle box that's easy to put over someone's head. That's going to be an auto subject because this is one where there might be planes, cars, people. There might be a bunch of different subjects that I want to shoot that I don't want to have it specific to animals or birds. I'm going to let the camera decide with auto subject detect and give it the benefit of the doubt that it's going to pick the right subject in that situation. So having these banks kind of tweaked for each of your subjects will definitely give you the best outcome when you're out in the field. Landscape, 99% of the time, I'm going to shoot in single point focus here. I don't need subject detect most of the time in a landscape real estate environment. So in these settings here, like I said, I'm just going to switch it to single point and just focus, put it right here. The other feature that plays a huge factor in maximizing shooting banks is what they call the recall shooting functions hold. So a lot of this I've got, if you go on my website, the links, I'll have the links below, and you can set the camera up with all of the same settings. But the recall shooting function hold I use on my function 1 button. So the function 1 button is the top button. So function 2 on the bottom, function 1 on the top. The reason I like these is just they're easy to reach with 2 fingers, so you're not having to take your hand off the camera. You don't have to use your left hand. I've tried to set up the camera as best as possible that it's all done from my trigger hand. I don't have to use my left hand for most of the settings as I'm changing in the field. So the recall shooting function hold it's under the same place you'd find it's under the custom settings menu under controls, and it's under the custom controls for shooting. And this is where you will do all of your setting up for how you can dial in the custom settings on the camera. I said all this is available on the website. You go through and it's all broken down how I've set up each of these banks. So the recall shooting function hold is a beautiful setting. When you press the button, you don't have to press and hold, you just press the button. It will change all the cameras in settings. So if I click on that here, you can see here all of the settings you can change with that single button press. So where this is great is this allows you to fully override the bank you're in into something else. So a great example would be, so I said I'm going to leave the where to get these, but I also want you to also think for yourself on this, that depending on the type of subjects you shoot, this might be something that your recall shooting function hold might be completely different than mine, just solely based on I shoot this subject matter as well as this subject matter. So yeah, your recall shooting function hold might be something completely different. And I will set it up depending on which bank I'm in to be the opposite of what the bank is. So a great example would be, so my shooting bank A, let's just go to that real quick here. So my shooting bank A, when I hit that function 1 button, it changes from bird detect into animal detect. So in this case, I'm typically going to be, again, at the estuary, open environment, beach, that sort of thing. So I'm going to have otters, I'm going to have mink, I'm going to have seals, sea lions, possibly orca. I'm going to deal with mammals all of a sudden popping up. And like I said, with wildlife photography, you've got wildlife where you're going to an area, like I said, Yellowstone or Jasper, Banff, where you're going looking specifically for wildlife. But a lot of times with wildlife, you're out shooting something else and wildlife pops up. It's just the nature of it. It's really hard to go out and focus on otters for the day, just because they're just such a random animal to come across. You might know good areas for them, still going to be fairly random encounter. You'll be down at the beach photographing oyster catchers, for example. You're shooting your wide area like this here to keep the focus point off the rocks in the foreground. All of a sudden an otter pops up. With otters, quick switch the function 1 button and you switch over to animal mode, and you're now focused on the eye of the otter. And this is a great way, like you said, mink, otters, depending on what subject you're trying to photograph, animal detect can be better than bird detect. I find that since the last few updates, bird detect is a lot better than animal detect for birds. Wildlife's a tough one, and I understand Nikon struggles a little bit with some species. Otters have got very small eyes with glistening fur where their ears might pick up the nostrils. So otters are one that can sometimes be difficult. In this situation, you might still be better off just going single point on the head of the otter. Depending on what subject you're chasing, there will be sometimes that your override doesn't quite work and that single point is still your best bet. But this is a great one where same thing, you're down and you're photographing American dippers and a bear comes walking out of the bush, hit function 1, and you're on the eye. A larger box in order to get over the head there, and you're right on the eye of your subject, nice and quick and simple. So that's how I like to use it for my shooting bank A. In my shooting bank B, again, we're talking birds in the forest, and now, so for the recall shooting function hold, gone to a smaller box. We've kind of a limit just to tighten things down because this might be something popping its head up around a tree and things like that. So you're going to want to have a smaller box. I think I'm using this looks like a 9x3 box, which is a little bit smaller rectangle than I allow the camera to use in shooting bank A, but you quickly get it right on the eye and it stays there. So that's one of the really nice features with the custom function 1 button with the recall shooting function hold. It just allows you to go from birds to wildlife, and you're not having to go and try and do a subject detect change in menus. Single press button from birds to wildlife. I said depending on what you're shooting, you can totally change that up. Shooting bank C, where we're going to be dealing with wildlife. This one is, I'm going to change it to a larger rectangle. We're going to birds. And this will be because we are generally going to be a bird flying over. I'm photographing wildlife and an eagle comes flying past, owls comes flying by. That's going to be the sort of situation you run into there. And so with that recall shooting function hold, not only do you have options for manual mode or your shooting mode, I'm always shooting in manual mode with auto ISO for birds and wildlife. But you can change your shutter speed, so you can kind of set the shutter speed that you want it to be. I'll go 1/1000. It's a nice safe shutter speed to keep my ISO reasonably low, but fast enough to capture most action. Aperture, you set it as fast as it will go. That way the lens will shoot wide open for you, no matter what lens you have on. Exposure compensation, ISO sensitivity settings. So this one you can change it where if you put ISO sensitivity as 64, that means it'll just go as low as possible to get your 1/1000th a second, but then you have auto ISO, so it'll just go auto as needed to maintain that 1/1000th of a second. Metering, everything I do is matrix metering, so I don't need to have that checked because I'll already be matrix metering before going into this setting. So yeah, if you've got it, if you don't have it checked, it will just use the current settings that you have set. So a lot of these, because of the similarity in the shooting banks for birds and wildlife, I don't have to have them checked. I'm just going to be overriding the subject detect and the auto air and the autofocus area. That's going to be the main override when I'm doing this. And then if we go back to the menu for shooting bank D, for example. So go to shooting bank D. This one is a very important one. And this is one where, to give you an idea of how this can really work for you depending on your subject matter, this is going to be the landscape one, where all of a sudden, when you're out taking photos of landscapes, there's nothing worse than having a bear pop up, a cougar pop up. When you're shooting landscape, in British Columbia here, you're in beautiful places, amazing places, and that's when you're quietly sitting waiting for the sun to set or something like that. That's when you're often going to have something come wandering out and show itself to you. So this is a very important one if you're a landscape photographer, that function 1 button. So you can see I'm shooting an aperture priority, which I like to shoot for my shooting bank D. I like aperture priority for any sort of landscape real estate. I also shoot in manual ISO. I don't use auto ISO here. And then I'll shoot at 10 frames per second. I don't need 20 frames per second. I don't need that many photos. So by shooting that, when I hit this button, I change to 20 frames per second. I switch it to auto ISO. I bump it to 1/1000th of a second. And then I go to the auto subject detect. So doesn't matter what pops up, the camera will determine the subject. And I go to a decent sized box that I can put it over the subject as needed. So this is a great way, said you're sitting there, camera's on the tripod, and all of a sudden something comes running out. Function 1, bang, you're into wildlife mode right away, shoot, shoot, shoot. It runs off. You want to go back to landscape, hit that function 1 button, you're right back to your landscape shooting. And that allows, like I said, this is how you can really take advantage of these Nikon cameras. The shooting banks combined with like cycle area AF and the recall shooting function hold, they allow you to just completely take control of the camera in a moment's notice. Change the subject, change the entire settings. I said mine's quite refined because I am a bird wildlife photographer. So but if you wanted to have one set up for sports, one set up for landscapes, one set up for weddings, and one set up for birds, each of those can be super useful. But even in sports, for example, you're going to be shooting really fast, and then you want to get a nice tight shot of the player on the bench. That recall shooting functions hold. You can go from auto ISO and all that to manual ISO in a nice slow mode, 1/250 a second, to get the highest quality photo possible. And this is the things that you can think about. Same if you're a wedding photographer. If you're shooting at the reception after the wedding, where you've got a lot of action, you're going to be shooting at auto ISO just to kind of maintain a minimum shutter speed in certain situations. But then all of a sudden the bride is standing under the light in the hallway and you've got an amazing shot. Recall shooting function hold, you've got a portrait mode set up. So you've got your reception mode, 1 button changes over to a portrait mode. And these are things to consider, that this is how you can just really take control of these cameras no matter what subject is in front of you. I think we'll leave it there just because you can just keep going on, this will be an hours long video. The function 1 in video mode, I do change to the highlights where I can see my waveform, so that I have changed that to waveform for video mode, because that's really nice to see if I'm clipping or not. But for the function 2, that cycle area AF is in all of my banks for both photo and video. And I think that is, like I said, those 2 features, I think, make the Z8 and Z9 some of the better photography, videography cameras on the market. They really allow you to take control of it. And like I said, so much when I'm seeing people talk about struggling to set the cameras up or struggling to find things in the menus, is because these cameras are meant that you set them up and then you shouldn't really need to go into the menus. I've got them, just the amount of custom functions that you can do to override everything. 1 button changes this, changes that. you can really, really dial them in, and they are just fantastic tools. So yeah, like I said, links down below for the current settings. We can kind of play with these settings. You kind of it'll give you a better idea of how I've got them set up when you kind of start to look at that function 1, function 2, and you'll see how I've used some of the other custom function buttons on the cameras. Things like function 3 is my silent button for photography, which is great. I've got the pre-capture, which is or say the release mode. So I've got in photo mode, the video is now release mode. So this is how I can utilize the pre-capture, nice and simple. Press the button, back dial. I can totally take advantage of that. I said you can go through, and we'll talk about some of these other things in future videos. But today we'll just kind of leave it at the cycle area AF, shooting banks, and the recall shooting function holds, which I said is just an amazing way to override your camera. If this was helpful to you, please like and subscribe. Until next time, we'll see you out there. Take care.